Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Professional Women Roundtable webinar on building an anti-fragile career in seasons of volatility. We are delighted to have you with us today. I hope you're all well and bearing up as we adjust to the new COVID-19 world. I don't think we can say post-COVID-19 world anymore because COVID-19 is here, and I reckon it's going to be here with us for a while. We just need to adjust to living with it for the foreseeable future anyway. My name is Ivana Osage, and I'm the founder of the Professional Women Roundtable, or PWR for short. PWR helps women develop their leadership capacity and raise their visibility and representation in the marketplace. And that I consider very important, but we don't have enough time to go into that today. We also work with corporate organizations and their leadership to help raise awareness of the business case for gender diversity. And we develop programs to accelerate gender parity in the workplace to make the workplaces more female-friendly. We believe that redressing the gender imbalance and achieving inclusion is for the collective good, and men and women can collaborate to make it happen. It is key to transforming Africa and Nigeria as well. The main objective for today's webinar is to help you as career women think more strategically and proactively about building your careers. In a world that is increasingly characterized by unprecedented levels of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, how do we as professionals build anti-fragility into our careers to mitigate ourselves and our lives against sudden, unexpected external shocks? How can we work towards the convergence of our personal values and our life aspirations with our career trajectories? These are just some of the questions that we're going to be looking to answer today. It's my pleasure to have with us three seasoned, credible, and competent professionals. Ronke Adedeji, who's the MD CEO of Leadway Penshaw PFA, Andrew Ali, partner and group CEO, Southbridge Group, and Tariq Badegeshin, MD and Chief Investment Officer, ARM Harris Infrastructure Fund. These are all people I hold in high esteem and I have utmost respect for, both professionally and in their personal capacities. So I think you will find the next 1 hour or so very valuable indeed. I think we're in for a good session today. Now for some housekeeping. So the format is that each of our speakers will speak for about 15 to 20 minutes. They will each address a particular element. And then when we finish with all the speakers, we will have a Q&A session with the audience. Please type your questions into the Q&A box as we go along. As a matter of fact, perhaps I better check. If you can hear me, could you please type yes or say hello or something in the chat box so I know that I'm talking to you and you can hear me clearly. You know what technology can be like sometimes. Yes, fantastic. So you can all hear me. That's great. So at the end of the, when the speakers have spoken, we will start taking your questions. Possibly, actually, they may decide that they may want to take some questions before we get to the end, but hopefully we can do all of that right at the very end. Everybody is muted so that we can have an uneventful session today. And also, this is being recorded, so the recording will be available for our attendees at the very end. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Mrs. Ronke Adedeji to speak to us. She's going to, she has some slides and she's going to focus particularly about sharing her personal career journey experiences and the lessons she has learned along the way that she believes are learning points for others. Mrs. Adedeji has been, she's a veteran, she's a career veteran, so she has a lot of experience and expertise that she's going to share with us today. So my next job now is to find her slides and share them. Let me try and do that. Right, Mrs. Adedeji, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ivana. Good evening, everybody. Thank you to Ivana for this discussion. I think it's a very, very timely discussion. And I also think it's an imperative for professionals. Um, I've listened to a lot of webinars over the last few months. I'm sure we are all fatigued from listening to and joining webinars. And I found that most of the discussion around now has been from an organizational point of view. So I think, you know, the topic is very, very timely. It's appropriate. And it's an important discussion, particularly in the environment that the world has progressively become. And so if we go to my first slide, please, Ivana. So the world has and is often described as VUCA these days. And VUCA really just means volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and it's an old US military term that is used in business to describe the environment that we're in now. So that sort of gives you an idea of how life has evolved if we've gotten to the point where we're describing our business world as being VUCA, a term that would normally be used in military circles. So this year has been as VUCA as you can imagine. Uh, Over the years, it just seems that each year is more and more VUCA. And this year, really, I would say so far has been really epic. So what is our goal? What's our objective? What should we be trying to achieve? And I think as professionals, it's important that we not just survive during these turbulent times, but we're able to successfully navigate and even benefit, thrive during the disruptions, whether business, political, economic. And so the way I'm going to approach my part of the discussion, like Ivana said, is to talk a little bit about my experience. I know that everybody's experience is different. There's no one cap that fits all. But I'm hoping that some of what I have to share will be useful to some of us. So like she said, I'm a veteran, a professional, a career veteran. I called it a textbook career professional. So with a little bit of background, I'm an accountant turned banker, and now I'm a pension fund manager. So I've worked for over 30 years in only 3 organizations. People tell me that's very old school. So that's 2 banks and 1 PFA, and that's over 30 years. The shortest time I spent in any organization was 9 years, and the longest so far has been 14 years. And so most of my experience was in banking and most areas of banking, and then in the last 12 years or so, the pension fund administration. So Ivana, if you just show the next slide, please. So on the next slide, don't worry too much about this graph, but what I did here was to just show the last 30 years and to give you a visual understanding of how volatile it's been. And this was over the period of most of my career. The only year here that isn't here now is 2020. And we know what 2020 is like. We will see some more zigzags. So the indices there really are the crude oil prices, the stock exchange, Nigerian stock exchange, and inflation. Those are the ones with volatility. The stable line you see there is the GDP. So it's been as volatile as you can imagine over the years. The stability in the GDP is not necessarily a good thing because those are really low levels for a developing country. And I'm sure, I dare say that's part of why, you know, there's been so much uncertainty and ambiguity. So if I just point out also some specific things over that period of the 30 years of my career, the Naira when I first started working was 88 kobo to a dollar. Today, we all know what the Naira is. It's plus 450 Naira to a dollar. And during that period, there were 2 global recessions, and the third one is apparently starting now. And seeing as, you know, recessions don't last a year, the impact and the fallout tends to go on for a few years. So you can just imagine also the volatility. And in between all of this, there were disruptions caused by maybe regulators, and sometimes it was politics or elections. So various things were happening. And so you find that at any point in time, there are several moving parts that you have to contend with. During this period also, when I started work, there were maybe 30 banks, and slowly at some point, the banks peaked to 144 banks in Nigeria. In 1994, that dropped to 89 banks, and right now we know that we have, I think, 26 banks. So, so that just sort of gives you an idea of some of the volatility that happened over the course of my career in the last 30 years plus. If we could go to the next slide, please. So these are my discussion points. So I'm just going to run through them very quickly. And the first one I titled as conviction, and it may seem a bit odd when we're talking about anti-fragility, but for me, this is quite topical now because a lot of people are under pressure regarding whether to remain a career person or to start a business. And this pressure it didn't really start today, but it's become quite fashionable to have a side hustle, as it's called. So for me, I think that it's important that you know and you are convinced that this is what you want to do. Over the years, it didn't dawn on me immediately. I think it took time, but I remember the early years and midpoint of my career, I used to be under a lot of pressure because a number of my friends were going out to start up their businesses and stuff. It's important because I think what it did for me was ensure that I was committed. I didn't have a backup plan. There was nowhere I was going. So I really had to focus on this. I had to be single-minded and not allow myself to be distracted. And this is important because in the world we live in, anything can happen and it can change overnight, as we've seen with the way this year has progressed. So you really need to stay on top of your game. And the reason also is because if you attempt to juggle your career as well as running businesses, you will find that you will probably not reach your full potential because you will spread yourself thin. Now, I'm not referring to you investing in a business which requires possibly your intermittent contribution. So there's a place for investments, but to combine a career on a full-time basis with also a full-time business venture, I think would lead to one losing focus. The next item is the issue of vision. And I say vision because it's important that we position ourselves properly within the world as it is, and pay attention to what's happening both globally and locally. So it's important that we all have a personal vision, a plan, and a strategy. A lot of us work in organizations where strategy is a big deal, and it's a big exercise, and sometimes days are taken to draw up a strategy, but we do not sit down to plan our career and have a plan and a strategy. So it's important that we have a clear vision of what we want and where we want to be. If I refer to my own experience, for instance, in my present job, I was headhunted for that job. And the reason I took it was because the job I was doing at the bank no longer aligned with my personal vision. And it also happened to be a VUCA period. And this was when the banks were being reduced to 26. So I took a leap of faith. I left and joined the pension fund industry. Now, this was a completely new industry. It was a startup, and I actually took a pay cut to do this, and people thought I was crazy. I mean, the comments and the feedback, I thought, but I'm happy to say that it paid off. But it was a turning point for me. Another point I'd like to make also about our attitude is how we deal with change. Uh, we the only constant in life, they say, is change, so we must learn to embrace it. The reality of life and business is that there will always be many moving parts at the same time. So but during those times, there are usually opportunities, so it's important that we calmly search out the opportunities. Uh, the ability to adapt and to be agile is critical in a VUCA world. It's what will ensure that we are able to hold on and build a career. Um, uh, when the banks were reduced from 144 to 89, the bank I was working with at that time was also struggling. So this was the era of bank distress, and a lot of banks were closing shop. And this bank was struggling at that time. And a new leadership was brought in to the bank. And the idea was for them to come in with vision and direction. This was a very pivotal point in my career because um, things completely changed for me. The new leadership changed the direction of the bank. Now, I could have left because what usually happens when there's a change in leadership in most organizations, people just start dusting their CVs and assume that the best thing to do is to go. So at this, this is a time when one needs to be really analytical and decide which way to go. I stayed on and I don't regret it. It really was a wonderful experience for me at that time. Another thing about vision I'd like to mention also is the can-do spirit. I think as women, we tend to be happier in the background. There's an interesting phrase they call the imposter syndrome, where we think we're not quite good enough or, capable of the job that needs to be done. And I think that nervousness, that nervous energy concerning our jobs needs to be converted into something positive, and such that we are able to step up and perform, convert the energy into an ability to deliver. So it's important for us to be confident and not, to hide back. I think this is what strengthens one's career over time. Um, at the time the new leadership came into the bank, new people were employed, portfolios were redistributed. And at the end of the day, I ended up with a portfolio which I would say really didn't exist, because I was given a new segment of the market to go and deliver, and people a new segment of the market to develop. And I had a lot of back talk about how I had been undermined because new people came in and got better portfolios. But it's easier to go from 0 to 50 than 50 to 100. And rather than let uh, the situation get me down, I converted it into a positive attitude and was able to make a lot of progress. So I think for women, we really need to be bold. We need to step up and be strong. And I think we will surprise ourselves in terms of what we can achieve. Um, Learning and growth for me is very critical to reinforcing your career. For me, learning and growth is similar to pouring cement into a pillar or into the foundation to strengthen it. This is the basis, or the basis on which your career can be developed. And it's critical if you are going to be agile, if you are going to be able to survive the ups and downs. Um, Learning, you can learn and not grow, you can grow and not learn. So for me, it's a combination of the two that has to happen. And the learning and growth can be internal, it can be external. So when the new leadership came in, they came in with a lot of ideas, new products, new ways of doing things. It was a huge learning experience for me. I learned on the job. I learned about the job. I learned about myself. I was surprised at the things I was able to achieve. And for me, it's an opportunity I will be forever grateful for. I had a fantastic boss who pushed and challenged me, and it it really enriched my CV. It enriched my experience. So learning and growth, I believe, is a major way of building anti-fragility. A good mentor works too, so that you can, have someone to bounce ideas off. But I really did learn a lot in that experience. And it's important that we continue to seek out opportunities wherever we are. Please, there's nothing wrong in staying in an organization for a long time, but it is very wrong if you're doing the same thing. So please don't get stuck with doing the same thing for years and years. Look for opportunities, look for new initiatives, get involved, get engaged. I've heard people say things like, how much are they paying me? Is it my father's company? And, for me, that's not the right attitude at all. And I know sometimes, as women, we settle for less challenging roles because of having to balance all the other demands on our time. But it's important that, we are growing, we are learning, no matter where we are. When I took on that new segment in the bank and started to develop it, what it did for me was to expose me to other opportunities. So as I grew that initiative, I had the opportunity and the privilege of being called several times to develop new initiatives in the bank, new subsidiaries. And so that assisted, and that really assisted me a lot, even in getting my job with the PFA, because what it did was give me a track record for building initiatives and businesses. So it's important that we make a conscious and determined effort to learn and grow no matter where we are. The next point I wanted to quickly mention on was the fact that there will be distractions. There will always be distractions. And here, my comment would be, please don't follow the bandwagon. Bandwagons are usually going nowhere based on wrong perception. So make sure that you are focused on where you are going. I know also that the home front for those with families, uh, those who are married with children, that can also be a distraction. But it's important that we continue to study the environment, as VUCA as it may be. So don't be under pressure to make any decisions if you have not thought it through very well. Where a lot of us are analytical at our jobs. We do a lot of planning. We do a lot of strategy execution. So we need to bring that to bear in our personal lives. Um, yes, there will be challenges too, job losses. Um, for us here, I want to mention gender issues, uh, because very often women tend to be relegated to the background or given less technical work to do. Sometimes we quietly accept it because it's convenient, because we think, oh, I can't deal with the stress now. I have other things on my plate. Sometimes it's family. So we allow ourselves to be relegated to the background. And really, the the challenge which I appreciate is how to make sure you're not relegated to the background, and continue to perform and deliver whilst dealing with all the other demands on our time. So I remember when I first started banking, I went into investment banking, and at that time it was an almost 100% male domain. And my boss was not happy to have a woman in his department. And to make matters worse, I had the audacity to get pregnant. It was quite a struggle, but I was quite determined. I was quite dogged and made sure that my work, could speak for itself. Another challenge is the issue of work-life balance, which we all at some point struggle with, and this is the reality for a lot of people, but even so for women. And the thing here, the only thing I can say here is don't get bent out of shape about this. The reality is that a completely balanced life is a dream. It's not realistic. But I believe that there are seasons. So there will be times when, yes, we'll make a sacrifice, but there will be times when we should seek to also, compensate ourselves and get that balance right. Um, of course, I know that there are extreme cases where the sort of job that we do does not provide that balance, and that really is something that needs to be reassessed and possibly changed. But I think work-life balance we should view with some balance, and know that there will be seasons when it will not balance, and there will be times when it will balance. So lastly, if I just would talk about the things I could have done better, and one of them is networking. And I'm sure this is something that I'm sure a lot of us will agree with. Most women are shy away into the background and do not network. This is something that we just haven't been able to get our heads around, and we cannot afford to continue like this. Not the way life is, not the way business is. We need to be more visible. We need to be more active. We need to be more proactive. And networking could be both internal and external. So even within your work, your job right now, there is some networking you can do. And I'm not talking about going to visit your boss at home, or just generally joining the rumor mill and hanging around gisting. Hopefully you're too busy for that. So, but here really I'm thinking of collaboration with your colleagues such that there's mutual progress and achievement. So it's positively developing your career. Um, and of course, the obvious one to everybody is external networking. We really need to get this going. A suggestion I have is to join up with another colleague, so that you're like a tag team. So you're both like encouraging and dragging each other to these events. And I'm sure for us women, we're very happy now that a lot of it is can be done remotely. So from the comfort of your house, you can participate in various professional trade groups, associations. So that's one area that I feel, that we really need to do better. I wish I had it in me to do better, but I'm encouraging as many people to. The other thing that I also want to talk about is in terms of looking for new job opportunities. So I don't know if this is also a female thing, but we may not be as adventurous as men in terms of job searching. So what this does is that you are able to see what is out there, what's available, what's of interest, and it keeps you informed. It helps you to better fine tune your vision and to continue your analysis. And so I think, I think it's important that we just keep our eye out there. And it can also help you, it can even help you change direction depending on, what's going on in the environment. And then also finally, I think being global in your visioning is important. Sometimes we tend to, or maybe that's probably a little bit old school, tend to look inwards and just Nigeria. But in scanning the landscape, look broadly, look outside, see what's going on, what's new out there in terms of jobs, in terms of careers, where is the business world going, what are the new disruptions in your career path, and possibly other career paths. It's possible that from what you see in the way the world is going, it could even lead you to change your direction. So I think I think that's also important. So in conclusion, um, Ivana, thank you. Can you just go to the last slide? So I would just advise, let's be purposeful, uh, let's be visionary, let's be strategic in building our careers. Don't let it just happen. Uh, and then build some agility and reinforce your career through learning and growth. I think this is very key. You don't just grow, but learn as you grow. And let's be ready to be adaptive also. Stuff will happen all the time. And so sometimes you would just need to adapt and maybe keep validating your strategy and your plan for yourself. So the present situation is a fantastic opportunity. What are we doing about it? What are we doing even in our existing environment? I think a lot of people are working from home, and it's possible that some people are seeing it as an opportunity to put their feet up and catch some well-deserved rest. But this is actually a great opportunity to make a difference, either where you are or outside where you work, and even in terms of what you uh, what your direction is. So what is the new, we've heard about the new normal. How are you going to be relevant in it? What is important? And finally, I just want to say, please enjoy the ride, even if it's a roller coaster. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ivana. Ivana?
So I guess you didn't hear anything I said, right?
Oh, no, we
We'll repeat
didn't.
that. Thank you very much, Mrs. Adediji. That was very insightful. The questions are coming. I won't summarize just yet the points you made. I'll wait until we get to the very end. We'll keep the questions coming and then we'll take them at the end. So right now I'm going to call on Andrew Ali, who is going to take us through, he's going to highlight workable, actually he's going to map out strategies for future-proofing your career and building in sufficient optionality to mitigate possible external shocks. So over to you, Mr. Ali.
Thank you, Ivana, and thank you for having me on this. It's a real pleasure. I'm, normally, when you're on panels, sometimes if you're lucky, there's a token woman, and it's all men, and often even when you're talking about professional development for women and things like that. So it's a pleasure to be on a panel with everyone else being female. So great. Look, I could almost just pack my notes up and go home, because I think Ronke actually covered a lot of what I was going to say, and it's not surprising, because I think the same things that you would need to build a career are also many of the same elements that you would need to develop sort of anti-fragility into that career and building optionality. But I think there are certain different twists that I can bring in on the same thing. Just a little bit of my own journey to start off with, and I'll keep this very brief. and there's a lot of commonality between myself and Ronke as well. I started off life as an engineer, at least doing an engineering degree. I then became a chartered accountant. I then went into banking, and depending on how you define banking, have kind of stayed in there, although moved more into the investment side of banking and investment management in terms of what I was doing with the AFC. Now, I sort of have about 8 different points that I wanted to talk about in terms of building optionality and future-proofing your career. The first is to think about certain foundational skills that you need to build up, and especially as you move from the very entry levels of a career up into middle management and eventually into senior management, you will find that there are certain things that are just important, regardless of whether you're a doctor, whether you're in banking, whether you're in advertising. Some of these are negotiation skills, understanding of finance and accounting. As you become, higher up in the organization, you need to understand the numbers, people management skills. Again, as you move up an organization, you're going to have to manage people. Even at an entry level, you'll be managing people, although essentially managing upwards. But as you move through the organization, you have to manage upwards, downwards, sideways, and every other direction you can think of. And believe you me, you always have a boss. You always have someone you report to. Even the president of Nigeria, at least in theory, reports to the Nigerian people. So you're always managing upwards throughout your career. Continuous learning is something I'm going to come on to and maybe take it from a different angle. But in terms of your continuous learning, you need to think about how you can, if you're not learning these things on the job, how you can build these kind of foundations into what you're doing. The other thing you need to think of is breadth versus depth. So, are you going to be very skilled in something, or are you going to be broad and maybe not so skilled? And there's no answer to this, but I think I just a little anecdote. Obviously, we've got COVID. It's affecting the travel and tourism industry very badly. I have a friend who's a pilot with an airline. He's been in that airline for 15 years or something, and we were talking about what could happen, and he was saying, well, look, I have so much depth and so much specialization that it's hard to see what else I can do. So you need to, especially when the whole industry that he's in is kind of being devastated at once. It's not like his own airline goes bust and he can move to another airline. So that's the sort of the extreme depth, but breadth. If you're too extreme on breadth, then you're kind of a jack of all trades and master of none. And as you can see, one of the things I'm going to talk about later is how you build your reputation, and being skilled at something is important, to building a reputation. So you have to think about this. You have to think about how you balance getting the right breadth in your career, as well as the right depth in certain areas. There's no unique answer to this. It very much depends on you, what field you're in, your past experience. But it's something you need to think about very carefully. The third thing is continuous learning. And I think Rumke talked about this quite a bit, and I fully agree with what she said. I would add a few things. Firstly, particularly in the Nigerian context, learning is associated very much with getting qualifications. And, very often people come and ask me and they're like, oh, I want to do this. What qualification can I go and get that will allow me to do this? And qualifications are good, and I don't want to knock them, but certainly as you develop in your career, the sort of paper qualifications you have become far less important, and it's more about the skills and the skills you have and what you can do. And again, learning is not necessarily just, going to a course or going on Coursera. It's also things you can learn on the job, but you just have to be deliberate about doing that. And it's all about building up foundations. I think there are two other aspects to learning, or one other aspect to learning that again people don't think about, which is around how do you use learning to sort of challenge your mental models and your thinking about how the world works. Because as Ronke said, we're living in an increasingly VUCA world, and I'm going to start using that expression a lot more. The world is changing basically, and you have to be changing your mental models and how you think about things. And part of learning is also seeing and observing how your environment is changing and trying to be adaptable to that. So one of the things that now we're doing all these Zoom webinars and everything. So maybe 3 months ago, you weren't thinking about, okay, how can I use all these communication tools to broaden my network, out of Nigeria or out of whichever domain you're in. Now, hopefully, what has happened under COVID, the fact that we can work at home, has opened your eyes to that, and your mental model about, how you work, what you work, what that means is changing. One of the things I ask myself periodically is, in the last 6 months, in the last year, what have I changed my mind about? Because I know that I'm not right on everything. And I know that even if I was right on something, the circumstances may have changed. And so if I'm not changing my mind about things, it means that I'm not learning, I'm not absorbing, I'm not looking at what's going on in the environment. So that's something I do as an exercise. If you want to future-proof your career and build optionality, you need to work on building a network. You need to, your name needs to be out there. You need to know people, and you just need to have that network as broad and as wide as possible. But you also need to be quite, what word would I use about networks? You need to understand that building a network is not necessarily a transactional thing. It's not you go to a cocktail party, you meet someone, the next day that guy calls you up or that lady calls you up and says, look, send me your CV, I've got a job. It's a much more time-consuming process than that, and really, to be successful at networking is as much about how much you give. Actually, it's probably more about how much you give and how useful you are to other people than it is about how much you're taking. The other point about networking is that again, and why it's important, but how you also need to calibrate how you think about it, is that a lot of opportunities that come to you from your networks don't actually come from your, if you want to take the LinkedIn, your first level of contacts, because your first level of contacts, your friends, the people you're going to drinks with every Friday or whatever you do, are people that you're in touch with, and therefore you share the same knowledge as them, broadly speaking. So the opportunities that they know about, you already know about. It's the people that maybe they know, their sort of friend that you sometimes see, so who are like second or third level contacts, or second or third level removed contacts, who have information that you don't have. And whether it's getting opportunities, whether it's finding out information about things, very often they are the people who can really add value, because they have the information that you don't have, that you want. So you need to think about that in terms of, having a broad network, but having people that you can ask, oh, do you know this person? Do you know someone who can help me with this? The other thing to think about in the general context of networking, maybe slightly off, is it's also to differentiate between mentors, sponsors. So a mentor is really somebody who you can learn from, somebody who can advise you, or somebody who can teach you something or show you something, typically. A sponsor is someone who, is, and this may be more within an organization, but a sponsor is the sort of person who would push you to a job, who would push you to a promotion, who would push particular opportunities to you, as the name suggests. And it's, obviously one person can have these two roles, but it's very important, I think, for you to distinguish between the two and know how you're relating with people. Because if somebody is relating with you in a way that she thinks she's your mentor, and you are thinking that she's somebody who's going to be sending your CV out to all her friends to get that job or that position, then that relationship might not work very well. This brings me to the next point, I think, which is again around building up optionality and future-proofing your career. You really need to think about developing your reputation. And Ronke, I think, made the point, and I hope I'm not stereotyping, but building on Ronke's point, that ladies, I think, are more likely than men to be a bit shy about self-promotion. But I think trying to build a reputation is not about self-promotion vacuously, because the best way to build a reputation is by being seen to be the best at something. And that's something. You don't necessarily have to be the best lawyer in the world, but if you are the best lawyer in intellectual property in Lagos, that's how you start to build a reputation. You don't build a reputation by being a good lawyer, because if someone says, oh, I need a good lawyer, then you name one. There'll be 15 good lawyers, but a good lawyer who's the best lawyer in IP in Lagos, there may be 3 people who are named. The other thing with building a reputation is that, frankly, again, even myself for many years, and I think still today, because of my personality, I'm not so good at sort of going out and sort of broadcasting things. But to be honest, you have to do that. You have to put yourself in a position where you're seen. Because again, a lot of opportunities are things that come to you because you're top of mind. And I'll give you a very good example. People always talk about being on boards. Now, typically, when companies are looking for board members, they say, oh, we're looking for a board member, and these are the characteristics. And all the people on the board think, okay, yeah, who do I know that meets those characteristics? And of course, it's the people who are top of mind. And that's why you see that, it's the same it's the same people who keep on showing up over and over again. So when boards and again, excuse me maybe for saying this, but I like to be frank sometimes. When boards decide, oh, they want more ladies on the board, there are probably 10 names in Nigeria that go around. That is expanding now, but you can probably a few of those names spring to mind, because they're the people who are known as women who are doing well on board. So the more you get yourself out there, if you want to be on boards, try and get onto your friend's company board or a charities board or something, so that people know that you're on a board. And then the next time somebody is thinking about who's going to be on a board, maybe your name will come up. But really be deliberate in terms of building a reputation. Of course, you can't just build a reputation on sand. You need a solid foundation. So you actually have to be good at what you're doing, of course. The other one, so those 5 things I've gone through are what I would call the kind of solid career things. The next 3 and the last 3 things, and I'm just checking my where I am time wise, but I think I'm almost hit my time limit, but not quite. The next 3 things are so slightly more nebulous things, but I think are also important. Again, so the other thing is, if you're trying to build future-proof yourself and build optionality, you need to work on your personal finances. You need to have a pool of savings, because you don't know what can happen in your life and in your career. If you have some sort of in the US they call it an emergency fund or something. So if you find yourself suddenly unemployed or something, you have something to tide you over. So that's one thing you should have. You should also start to look at developing other streams of income. I think the point that Ronke made about side jobs and everything is important. You need to think about how you can do this without being distracted from your core competency, whatever that is. Bearing in mind also that you need to try and be top of your game in that core competency rather than just sort of mediocre. But there are many ways you can build up other streams of income. Obviously investing into things is one way. Again, depending on what you're doing, maybe doing things like speaking or writing, etc., can also be ways of developing alternative streams of income. But I think that those things give you a certain foundation and a certain resilience, which can help you cope with other areas of volatility. Linked to that, and especially as you get further into your career, there's a professor that in INSEAD that both Ivana and I are quite big fans of, and he talks about building a plan B. So when your sort of main career is maybe coming to a sunset, or you're getting to sort of retirement, what else are you going to do? What can you do that can generate an income, that can keep you interested and active? And this is maybe tied to some of the things that I was talking about in terms of alternative streams of income. So if you're writing, if you're doing a blog and you can somehow monetize that, if you're seen as an expert in an area, you can maybe start to become a consultant. You can start to serve on boards, not in a sort of necessarily, you know, even a full-time way, but just a way to, you know, add that future resilience to your career. The final point, last but not least, is really to take care of yourself. You know, you really need to think about your physical and your mental health, particularly your mental health. I think um, people neglect that, and again, you know, it's sort of seen as being sort of maybe, or it has been seen as being maybe sort of wimpy to talk about your mental health. I think that's becoming a much more accepted now as something that people talk about and care about. But obviously, it's up to you to really figure that out. And there are many different ways that you can take care of your mental health. And you know, I won't go into that now, but you know, everything from, you know, exercise, meditation, you know, sort of your spiritual side of your life, what have you, is to do that. And then also, I think also part of that is the point that that was made about work-life balance. And again, work-life balance, you can have a whole webinar on it, and you know, people argue that there's no such thing as work-life balance because, you know, work and life are the same, through to the other side of the spectrum where, you know, you go to Germany and everything is closed on a Sunday. And you know, there's a whole spectrum there. But I think one of the important things in terms of work-life balance is self-knowledge, because there are you know, there's no, like a lot of things in this thing, there's no one answer to it. There's a theory around what are called career anchors. So you know, each person, there's a certain aspect of their career that is more important to them than others, you know, and these things are around, you know, getting ahead. So, you know, do you want to be the CEO? Having fun? Do you want to enjoy what you're doing? Making money? And sort of, you know, being free and not, you know, not reporting to other people. You know, you want to own your own business? Do you want to be an entrepreneur? Those kind of things. I think there may be another one, but I think, you know, you have to understand. Yeah, I think the other one is a sense of belonging and being part of the organization. So you have to figure out, you know, what is important to you in all these things, and you know, what you get, which of those you get from your career and which of those you get from your home life, and how you balance them, or how you try to balance them, realizing, I think, as Ronke said, that, you know, it's not going to be constant all the time. Sometimes, you know, maybe you'll be more busy on work. Sometimes, you know, maybe you'll have the opportunity to be more busy on life. But that whole thing about your mental, your physical health, you know, coming from a strong place mentally, is really, I think, the final brick in terms of building that future-proofness and optionality into your career. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was very insightful. The questions are coming, and there are also lots of comments. I think that our audience are getting lots of food for thought. I'm going to now call on Tariye. Are you there, Tariye?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. So can I get started?
Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Great. I'm familiar with several on the panel, and I'm seeing all sorts of old friends in the audience. And I see their questions. It's good to see several of them in the audience. So I'll start, as you asked, by just giving a little bit of my background. So I majored in economics. I went to a small liberal arts college in New England called Amherst College. And majoring in economics was very theoretical. And so I kind of had to balance between sort of theoretical education and practical skills, because I also needed to make money and be financially independent. I grew up in the Niger Delta, which meant that I saw firsthand the juxtaposition of big oil, poor communities, different forms of local, national, and international leadership impacts on economic development, with a backdrop of severe environmental degradation. So by virtue of that, I was passionate about globalization, international development. And so while I majored in economics, I also was keen on languages and studying, in fact, the development trajectory of other regions. So in university, I studied French, I studied Spanish. And when I graduated from university, I spent a year in Costa Rica, working on a World Bank project, polishing my Spanish and being global, if you will. When I got back from Costa Rica, I worked in the financial space. So I worked at PwC. I built some of those technical skills, finance, accounting, and I felt sort of the balance that I needed from some of that theory with technical, as well as this sort of global world with languages. And after attending a conference, I met the recruiter for the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and we started a conversation. And I ended up getting a job at the IMF, working in their Latin America department, given that I spoke Spanish. And I had an economics degree, specializing in international development. And I also had finance and accounting training from PwC. So I actually built my pre-MBA career in the multilateral banking sector in Washington, DC. I worked on 18th Street, and I had a badge that gave me access to the World Bank, the IFC, and the IMF. It's at this time that I met several of the African greats, such as Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the former Minister of Finance, Bright Okogu, he is the Executive Director for Nigeria at AFDB, and also a gentleman called Andrew Ali. He's a former CEO of AFC, and he's also on this panel today. My work at the IMF gave me a direct view into some of the largest financial interventions of that era. The $30 billion financial support package for Brazil and Argentina, respectively. I also got the chance to learn Portuguese, but really from a finance perspective only. It was an exciting time at the IMF, and I was in the most active department. I, however, began to transition into a greater belief in the role of the private sector in impacting development, and I decided to get an MBA to enable a career pivot. So I went to HBS, and I focused on Africa. I designed coursework around Africa. I ran the HBS Africa Business Conference. And when I ran that conference, I got the opportunity to meet some very special people. Many of them were young in the development of their businesses, but they were established leaders at the time. People like Bismarck Rewane, Tony Elumelu, Mo Abudu, Ben Bruce, and many of those names that I met many years ago when I ran that conference, effectively volunteered to run that conference as a way to after my MBA, because I felt that not only was Nigeria the future, but that it was really time for me to basically contribute my capacity to Africa. I had done a lot in the international development space, and I really felt that Nigeria was where my future would be. And so I moved back and basically did some work with actually one of the sponsors I had met at the conference, the CEO of Silverbird at the time, supporting them with capital raising, actually helped them meet certain potential partners. For example, ARM was one of the parties I actually introduced them to. And I was in Nigeria at an auspicious time when a bank called the Africa Finance Corporation was created. And one of the people I had developed a relationship with at the conference that I ran, who had become a mentor of sorts, potentially a sponsor, actually recommended me to the principals at the Africa Finance Corporation. And when we met, they asked if I would consider joining the startup team. The Africa Finance Corporation was to be a new form of development bank for Africa. In some ways, for me, in many ways, it was really just a perfect fit. And so I joined them. I joined them about 13 years ago. And in many ways, AFC is where I built my post-MBA career. So over a decade ago, that was a time when infrastructure and finance, energy finance, was at a nascent stage. I had a front seat to most of the large-scale transactions on the continent. And if we didn't actually invest in deals, we reviewed the deals at least. Some of the early deals we considered, for example, were even the Lekki Toll Road, for which ARM was a sponsor, another kind of link to where I am now, as well as lots of the major deals. Joining a new institution like this gave me access to all aspects of the bank, everything from strategy to deal pipeline development, investing, capital management, etc. I chose to focus on the investing side. I believed it was important to build strong technical skills despite a perceived affinity for strategy and business development. Being there early gave me the chance to participate in building systems, in creating our investment process, in testing them, refining them. I made our first investment in Main One, whose CEO, Funke Opeke, is another one of Nigeria's greats. I was fortunate to sit on the board of Main One with other investors like the Harith General Partners out of South Africa, another link to my current role. I also made our first investment in a renewable energy project called the Kabiolika Wind IPP. I got to sit on some of the presidential committees representing AFC when we tried to solve Nigeria's power problem. It was a very exciting and challenging time to be at the forefront of building a new institution. I saw deals go well. I saw deals go badly. I built experience. Ultimately, AFC brought together capital and impact. It reinforced that purposeful and smart capital can be used as a driver of change. I found comfort in infrastructure and in the satisfaction of building real assets. I found my home, and in many ways, I found my calling, the space where finance met purpose. During this time, I got married, I had children, and with my first child, I needed more flexibility. I felt some of those pressures that come onto us as we start to juggle dual, double, and multiple more responsibilities. And I decided I would try my hand at running my own business so that I could have a bit more control, perhaps more flexibility. AFC leadership such as Andrew and the CIO at the time, they had a broader vantage point. They asked me to consider staying on one of the boards, on the Kabiolika board, as a way to stay connected, they advised. And I was always grateful to Andrew for seeing beyond, to some extent, what I saw then. But it was a great time for me when I took those couple years to run my own business. I started with a partner. We got great clients. We worked with Cargill, for example, in their agro-industrial business, Louis Dreyfus, also worked with banks such as Infrastructure Bank, did some work even with Lagos State. And it was a very good time, a great learning, critical because I learned how to create value and how to create commercial proceeds of my pitch and my performance. Soon into that time, Andrew asked me to consider coming back, actually. Andrew and the CIO, who asked me to stay connected, they asked me to consider coming back and to take a role leading industrials. It was perfect timing, especially given the fact that Nigeria was going into a crisis, which was the 2015 currency crisis. And I definitely saw a lot of instability coming into the market. And also I was just excited about the chance of doing more work in industrial infrastructure. So I spent several more years at AFC, again, doing some very interesting transaction work. The market for infrastructure and sophisticated investing had increased dramatically. Innovation in capital solutions, especially blended structured instruments, credit enhancements, became the new normal in infrastructure finance. And I had the opportunity to lead some of the largest transactions that incorporated many of all these themes. AFC also appointed me to join several think tanks on climate finance and innovative capital. In fact, I correct, they asked me to consider joining. It looked hard. It looked like it would take too much time, but I still did it because I felt it would be somewhat of a global exposure, global experience, and I needed that. And so I took it on. At this point, I just thought it couldn't get better than this. What job could be better than this? It seemed like the perfect thing, and that why would I ever leave? I would never want to leave such an awesome place to work. Then I got a call from people from Harris and people from ARM, people I had worked with for many years before. I had worked with them at various times in the past, and they asked me to consider an opportunity. This opportunity would give me the chance to lead, to make my mark, and to have a stake in the business. When I discussed the opportunity with my circle of advisors, friends, family, the majority, if not all, encouraged me to charge forward. Now, I've taken up a new role leading the joint venture between ARM and Harris, the two organizations I know quite well, and I continue to work in a space that I really enjoy and I continue to be excited by. And so this is the next phase of my career. In the interest of time, I will segue into the theme that I've been asked to speak on, which is workable tactics that can be employed in job searches to find the best fit job opportunities, even for executive level roles. Now, before I put forward a few ideas, let me start by saying that I am passionate about a couple things. One is my family, the other is my work. I am utterly and totally addicted to my family and to my work. And I cannot think about work without thinking about life and thinking about purpose. So as we embark on thoughts about career planning, let's start with the career development spectrum as a backdrop and then speak a bit about life and purpose. Andrew spoke earlier about early versus late stage, and I want to put a bit more color around the career development spectrum. Where we start with the early career professional, mid-career professional, and the executive level or senior professional. Let's think about the early career professional. This is the recent university graduate. They have some technical skills, the foundational skills. They're fast learners. We're looking for fast learners in that space. Capacity to deepen technical skills.
Harry, I don't mean to be rude, but we're almost running out of time now.
Oh, okay. I can continue. I'll continue. Okay. Ivana, sorry, just to let you know, the other speaker spoke for 30 minutes and I've only had 13. So I'll need 10 minutes if you don't mind. I'll be able to finish in 10 minutes. That would only be fair. Okay. Thank you, Ivana. Thank you, Ivana. All right. Now, with mid-career professionals, you're looking for technically sound, can get the job done. They can hit the ground running. They're resourceful. They can learn on their own to fill gaps. They're familiar with sector trends. They'll fit in. They can manage small teams. In the executive world, in the executive and senior professional space, you're looking that they can check all these boxes, a strategic mindset. They can manage down, up, and sideways. They have a strong network. They can use relationships productively, solve complex problems. They can manage and influence stakeholders, and they can transform without disruption. So as you think about your next step in your career, depending on where you see yourself in that spectrum, start by doing the following. Decide what you want and write it down. Think about the role you would like in the next 3 to 5 years, the type of company, the sectors, the functions, the size of the company, the culture. Consider the cities and the countries you are willing to work in. Are you willing to move? If so, where? What type of compensation? think about your special fingerprint, as Oprah would say. What is your fingerprint that gives you that advantage? The different aspects of your experience, skills, network, and what differentiates you. In the context of COVID, what sectors will stay resilient? If the job you want does not exist, can you create it? Then think about your personal side. What are your core values related to work and family? What are your boundaries with respect to time? Are you willing to travel? What's the level of your commute? What pain type and pain level can you tolerate? What can you not tolerate? This is not a vision board, it's a planning board. Take a deep dive into the role you have described when you wrote it down. What do you bring to the table? What skills do you have? What network do you have or that you can develop? Can you join an industry body? Can you take the CFA? Can you volunteer with a think tank or a nonprofit to expand your toolkit? How does your special combination of experiences strengthen you? And how would you succeed in such a role and contribute to the success of that company? Develop a profile of yourself, highlight the skills and substantive elements of your work that meet the needs that that role you defined required. Tailor-make your profile or your CV to highlight those specific experiences, not just the jobs. Bring out your skills. Work on your narrative. Consider creating an essay block for that narrative. Start to read. Build a reading list. Try alternative media. Try to hear perspectives outside of your world. Then, with what you've written, create an index of companies. Start to scan. Think about the companies that have the roles. Think about people who who lead those companies or who are influential in those companies. Ask for contacts of recruiters that specialize in that field. Build relationships with people that work in those companies, people you know who know people in those companies, people who know recruiters, etc. Develop a continuous engagement mindset. Don't start conversing about a new job when you need the job. Use exploration, discovery as part of that process. On the point of visibility, there's a lot of current discussion on the issue of personal brand and being visible. And yes, it is important, but visibility should not be the objective. Rather, focus on what problem you seek to solve for this world. What change do you seek to make with your special fingerprint? For the first time in the world, we all have direct access to make our voices heard, and women need to make our voices heard. Use these platforms to form solutions for our world and to share your ideas. Be visible to achieve purpose. Then you will be known for a purpose. And there are opportunities when your purpose is known. You will be considered a thought leader and an expert, and you would then be called, not simply because you are visible, but because you have something to say that matters and will make a difference. When it comes to interviews and applications, expand your scope for interviews. Consider it practice. Apply for positions that you think are beyond you, that you don't even think are at your level. Practice for each interview as if you really want it and you would take the job, but don't get attached. After each interview, think about what you've missed. Could you have highlighted something better? Continue to refine, continue to improve. Try to get recruiters to give you constructive feedback. I think it's worth mentioning that one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was that dream jobs don't come from recruiters. They come from the network. There's only one job I got from a recruiter, and that was the IMF job. Every other one has come through people. However, recruiters give great training, they give great insight, and they give great feedback. I couldn't have had the standalone conversations on how I could add value to a company if I hadn't interviewed for so many roles, many of which I wasn't even particularly interested in, but they gave me good practice. On networking, many of you are probably thinking about that heavy word called networking, and the other panelists have spoken about it. And there is a difference between socializing and meeting people and cultivating a strategic network of advisors, decision makers, and insight providers in your field. I've never considered myself a good networker. I actually think I'm pretty bad at it. In fact, I think I'm an introvert. However, I believe in the power of the ecosystem and the concentric circles of groups of people that I can learn from and from which I can find opportunities. These circles could be circles of peers, circles of elders, and circles of those who are younger than you, and they will inspire us with fresh ideas. These relationships must be tended like a garden for nourishment, caring, and there's give and take. Practically, you can build this by joining organizations and join leadership. Volunteer to lead in these organizations. Think about WIMBIZ, think about think tanks. There are so many opportunities to lead, and we should definitely grab them. In rounding up, I'd like to leave you with a thought. McKinsey does an annual research piece on women in the workplace. One of their insights is that women always apply for jobs for which they believe they are a perfect fit for, or they believe they are completely qualified for. Men, on the other hand, will apply for jobs that they are less than qualified, and they will often get the job. So, you know, when you write down that job that you want in 3 to 5 years, why not start that process now and go for it? You're probably qualified and you might just get it. When I described my career path, I thought it critical to mention the people who were key players in my journey. Some served to simply inspire me. Others were active drivers. Some were advisors. Some connected the dots, and others were the dots. I tell the story as if it were fortuitous. However, I was actually doing a lot of that work that I described, and that formed the basis of a lot of what actually looked like luck, but it was simply the coincidence of joining luck with God's grace and strategy. Thank you, Ivana.
Wow, thank you, Tariye. That was very, very insightful, very rich. So we have loads of questions. From what I can see, we have about 14 questions. I don't think we're going to have time to take all of them because we are nearly running out of time. I'm going to try and cover as many as I can. So the first one I can see is, what advice would you give if after working for more than 15 years in one space, you get an offer that involves you pivoting to a senior executive level in a different industry? Is this wise? So which of our 3 panelists would like to take that? Ronke, would you like to take that? Are you there?
Okay, I could start off. I think that very often, as women, I think Tariye mentioned that a little bit. We tend to wait for that perfect, ideal opportunity that we think we're fully qualified for. When I changed jobs, my current job, I took something that was completely new. I had no experience in it. It was a new industry. But you'd be surprised that what you have done over the last 15 years has prepared you to take an executive position. Definitely do your research, ensure that the organization and the vision align with yours. What are the career opportunities you will have when you get there? But at the same time also, why do you want to leave? That's another question you have to ask yourself. Have you fully exhausted the opportunities where you are? So you would need to compare the two, do your homework. But at the end of the day, I would like to say that what you've learned over the last 15 years has probably prepared you for more opportunities and even more responsibility. So just do your homework and make an informed decision.
Thank you. The next one, how to create opportunities or look for challenges in the same organization when you have tried new initiatives several times and you have been shut down? Who would like to take that? I'm going to have to keep choosing one of the panelists if everybody stays numb. So starting in the same order, Andrew, would you like to take that, please?
Not really, but I will. So look, I think that a couple of things you can do. One is just to is to look for a sponsor within the organization who may be willing to sort of push for you to join him or her in whatever part of the organization, or maybe that person is running a project and asks for you so that you can sort of move to do something different, maybe to show what you're capable of. But, you know, I mean, to be honest with you, at some point, maybe that's also the point at which you should start thinking of moving on to a new organization. You know, I'm not an advocate of, you know, jumping jobs every 2 years. But, you know, when you feel that you're stagnating, when you feel that you're not growing, when you feel that you're not learning, you know, that's probably the time. And when you feel that you're not being pushed or stretched, that's probably the time to think about also leaving and joining a new organization or doing something different.
Thank you. How do you position yourself to attract quality mentors and sponsors? Tari, would you like to take that, please?
Sure. It's probably a very tricky question, and I think it's very important to sort of think differently about the mentor and sponsorship space, and think about it as relationship building and developing an ecosystem of give and take. I think a lot of people are looking for a benefactor or a messiah type figure that would save them. But business is about mutual benefit. And when you're actually able to contribute and work with the mentor more as a colleague, someone that might also be able to provide other insights. Sometimes it could be as simple as having a better book reading list, or having something that you can bring to that mentor and to have conversations about ideas, or ask to review an article or something of that nature. But I think one has to be strategic in how one thinks about adding value to the relationship, and how everyone sort of has an enriched life as a result of that relationship. And so when you think about the relationship as the objective, then ultimately you achieve the mentor. It's a similar theme to the journey is the destination. You focus more on the relationship, and then afterward you discover you have a mentor.
Thank you. I've got a question that is specifically for you, Andrew. It says, we keep hearing be the best. Does business leadership today with overrepresentation of men reflect this? In other words, is the overrepresentation of men in business leadership today an indication that all those men are the best at what they do? I'm only reading what I saw in the question box.
That's a very leading question, and of course the answer is no. And you know, it's quite a straightforward answer. I mean, you know, obviously society is not fair, and you know, without going into all the details, because it would take us to midnight. You know, I don't think that women have a fair shake at things, and I think that, you know, we would be better off as a society if there was more equality. I mean, I think if you look at many statistics, you will find that actually the more equality there is along different dimensions, the sort of better off society. I mean, the more equality between, you know, men and women measured on different dimensions, whether it's, you know, representation in parliament, salary differentials, etc. You know, the better those societies tend to be on different human indices. So I'm not sure there's anything more I can say.
No. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have run out of time and I'm not able to take any more questions. If you have any questions that haven't been answered, please do get in touch and I will try and get answers for you. I give you my word on that one. I'd like to say thank you very much to Ronke and Andrew and Tari. I think you've done a fantastic job. I mean, the insight that you have shared has been invaluable. I'm sure that I speak for our attendees. It's really an honor to have you here today, and thank you for speaking so openly and candidly. There are lots of comments in the chats. Everybody's saying how valuable they found the session. So thank you all very much, and thank you also to our attendees. Maybe we can keep these sorts of conversations going. I don't think there's enough about them. I mean, I think these are quite topical matters that as professionals we ought to stay on top of and get the benefit of other people's experience and insight. So thank you very much and stay safe, everyone.